Hi, I'm Casey Bell, and you're watching Writer to Writer Interviews. Welcome to another episode of Writer to Writer Episodes. Carolyn Wilman and James Anthony Ellis are with me today. Let's get this show started.
Hey, Carolyn, how's it going? I found it interesting, your bio, really interesting that you work small businesses for marketing purposes. How did your work lead you to being a writer and publishing so many books?
Well, it's an interesting path. I remember actually being in college and getting a C on a paper in English and thought, it doesn't matter. I will be a writer, so it's okay, a C. And and I ended up being a writer because I had been a marketer for years, and one of the skills you need as a marketer is writing, writing copy and different things that you do as a marketer. And then I got caught in the dot-com bubble because I'd been working with IT industry for 15 years. And at the same time, I had picked up the hobby of entering sweepstakes. And I went on a winning streak because I had developed a system from taking my marketing background and combining it with my hobby. So after the 100th person said to me, hey, what's your secret? I thought maybe I should write this down. So I did. And that's how I started. And it went from there. And then recently I purchased the rights to all of Helene Hadsel's work because as a sweepstaker, everyone had known Helene because back in the day, like in the 60s and 70s, she was a master manifester and entered sweepstakes, and she won everything she ever entered, including a fully furnished home. And she passed away in 2010. And I thought her work just can't stop there. It must continue. And so I talked to her son, her only living, her only living child. And I said, I want to republish her work so that other people can learn. And so that's what I've been doing. And that's how I came to have the book that we're discussing today, which is In Contact with Other Realms, because that's what she did. She used her higher power to win prizes. And so I've gone on this really twisty road as a marketer.
That's awesome. I do want to focus on that book. I found it really fascinating, the topic. It's a topic that I find interesting. The other realms, worlds beyond this one. Where did you come up specifically with that idea, the book called In Contact with Other Realms, including your childhood experiences at age 6, things like that? Can you go into all that?
That was actually Helene. Now, this is what's fascinating, is that I picked it up because it's what I'm doing now too. So this was the book she was actually destined to write. So when she wrote her first book, The Name It and Claim It Game, she knew that she needed to wrap the message of listening to your higher self and your inner voice and, talking to your guides in a package that people would read. A little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. And so that's why she wrote that book. And then once she had an audience who would be listening to her messages, she wrote In Contact with Other Realms. And I really wanted to get this book out because I believe that it's what we all need to be doing today. We need to be listening to our inner voice. We need to be talking to our guides. And I don't think any of us are doing it. I shouldn't say that none of us are doing it. We're not doing it to the extent that I think we should. And I think if more of us listen to that intuitive guidance, our lives would look very different. And that's why I wanted to make sure this work got out. And actually, I plan to write my own kind of version of this later on, maybe in 2022, because I have other books I want to write first.
That's awesome. Yeah. So now I understand clearly that, okay, so that was her experiences that she had early on. You may have your own as well of connecting. Why do you think that people do not have access as much to their guidance, spiritual guides and things like that? What is the barrier, and what has us go through the veil? What can help us go through? So what's the barrier, and then how can we get through it?
Well, this is, I think, this is kind of come from me. This isn't going to be Helene's work. I believe it comes from our parents and our grandparents. So how many times as a kid, how many children have had invisible friends? Oh, that's not real. That's just their imagination. But what if they were real? What if they were their angels or guides or beings from another dimension? We don't know that. I mean, even my own daughter, when she was really little, said to me one day, I think she must have been like 2.5, and she says, I miss God. I said, really? She said, yeah. She says, I remember him before I came. I said, oh. I said, you know, he's still here. She's like, where? I said, he's right here. You know, I'm pointing to my tummy, but you can't see it on the screen. I said, he's right here. I said, but he's very, very quiet. You have to listen. And if you listen, he's there. She's like, okay. And I thought, oh, so what we need as people is to acknowledge that. Or how many times as an adult have you had an intuitive hit on something? Minor, like, oh, I shouldn't go down that road today. I should take the other route to where I'm going, because I don't know, you just have that quick hit of I should turn, you know, down the next street instead of this one. And you're like, what does that mean? And you turn, and the next thing you know, you hit a pothole and get a flat tire. And you're like, oh my gosh, I knew I should have gone down the other road. Why didn't I listen? Because we're told as children that that stuff isn't right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. And I think that's what Helene was trying to impart in this book, is that we need to listen. And if we do, our lives will not be perfect, but will be a heck of a lot easier.
Right. You know, that book, In Contact with Other Realms, that we're talking about, it asks, are there experiences in your life that you have been struggling to understand other dimensions? That's one of the, and I think the answer for a lot of people is yes. I think, especially, you know, as we evolve, you know, humanity evolves, that we are more aware, I believe. I don't think we're going backwards totally. So I think there's a lot of people who say, yes, there are experiences like that. What can help us towards understand, what steps can people take to understanding the other realms and, you know, reaching it?
Well, I think first you have to believe. You know, I think you have to have faith. And I think faith is interesting because a lot of people equate faith with religion. But I think there's more to faith than religion. There's faith in yourself. There's faith in your family. There's, you know, faith in your friends, faith that, you know, everything's going to work out. There was a movie, and the name escapes me. It was the one about the Marigold Club, and it was the movie, and took place in India, and the fella said, well, it'll all work out in the end, and if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. That's a great quote, because it gives you faith that, okay, so things are a little rocky now. And we also have to trust that everything happens to us for a reason, whether we label it good or bad. So, for example, you know, I received a bill this week that was far higher than I thought it was going to be. And I was miserable about it. And then it occurred to me, well, I always ask that everything happen in my life every day for the highest good of all. Well, if that is in fact the case, and I have faith that that's the case, then that's how it is. And then I finished my pity party and got on with my day.
That's great. That's awesome. So, I guess the final question I have has to do with our audience who may need some of the sage advice that's mentioned in the book. Do you have 2 or 3 pieces of sage advice that our audience could take with them after watching this? Anything that comes to mind that would really be helpful for them?
Well, Helene always loved Helen Keller and believed that life was an adventure and that we need to embrace every day as an adventure. And so if you wake up every day and think, oh, I wonder what today's adventure will bring, and if you approach everything that happens in your life as an adventure, even if it's mundane, then things change. So for example, I think it's a matter of perspective. So if you and I were standing on 2 sides of a raspberry bush, but my side had been already cleaned off by the birds, I'd be standing here saying, there is nothing here, like why this is miserable. And you'd be looking at your side of the bush going, oh my gosh, it's so plentiful, but we're on, we're looking at 2 different things. We're looking at the same thing from 2 different sides. So if you go through life and look at everything as part of the adventure, I think it's more fun. Even on the days, it's okay to be sad or miserable, and then you have your joys. If it was sun shining every day, we would never appreciate it because we need a little bit of rain, and that's how flowers grow. You need the rain to make flowers.
Don't go anywhere. We are going to be right back after this message. Are there questions, circumstances, or perhaps experiences in your life that you have been struggling to understand? The unseen world or other dimensions? You will find your answers in this book. In Contact with Other Realms, an adventurer's experiences and awareness. Written by Helene Hadsell, updated by Carolyn Wilman. Get it at Amazon, Kobo, or Apple Books.
I was very fascinated by your book, Jim, because most people write books on improving communication. And you flipped that on its head and you talked about understanding miscommunication, because it really is the other side of that coin. So what was your inspiration to write, I love the title. And how did you determine what all the different styles are? Because we know a lot of people have communication styles, but who knew you had miscommunication styles?
That's right. Well, I guess it's pretty clear for me that my inspiration is my past, growing up, attempting to communicate, attempting to connect with family members, friends, and having so many experiences where it just falls through. It just falls flat, or there's a fight or misunderstanding. And it just seemed to me that happens so often, and it has such ramifications for relationships, that I thought I need to write a book about communication. A lot of my life is about communication. As a writer, as a journalist, I went to school to learn journalism. I have a BA in that from Cal State Long Beach. So it was always about trying to connect, right? So that was always my life. I would write poetry starting at age 10, trying to get to those, those thoughts, those feelings that I had deep inside. I wanted to bring it out. And it was never enough just to bring it out, just to write it. It always felt so much better when it connected, when somebody read it, whatever I wrote, either they understood it, they got something out of it, they were moved, maybe to tears sometimes with some of my poetry or some of my writing. And so there was always a drive deep down to connect. And then some of the positions I've had lately have been in organizations, like nonprofit organizations. I have a men's organization I belong to, and I was a internal communication, I was about communicating. And the other work I did was in theater, so there had to be a lot of communication director to actor, and then the actor needs to communicate to an audience. So basically, my whole life's been about miscommunication, about communication. But I thought, you know what? I'm so studying like when things fall apart. And as a producer, I'm also a producer of films and things. You have to catch all those places where there'll be, where people will fall through the cracks. That's what a producer does. Like, okay, I need to plan this whole thing. And as I'm planning it, I need to be able to realize before it happens where people are going to get lost, follow directions to the wrong place. So I just got engulfed with this, what goes wrong? And I realized in writing a book about communication, what would make it approachable? What would, instead of saying like, well, here's all the things that you do wrong, and this is not very approachable, but if we could laugh at our mistakes, if we could laugh at the way we fumble and how we miscommunicate, we could have a laugh at it, we could actually learn communication skills by doing the opposite. So I thought, why don't I just do something different? I don't see any other book out there about miscommunication. So I'll just lay it out for everyone. Here's the pathway. Here's what you can do to make sure that you miscommunicate and in the attempt to get what you want. So mostly the idea was to have some fun with it, make it approachable, make it light, so that people can laugh at themselves, and in the process, learn communication skills.
Yeah, it's a great concept because, I've been in sales and marketing for years, and yeah, we're all taught about the communication, but it would have been really handy to have your book too, to understand the other side of that coin, to learn where the gaps are. So can you explain maybe a few points from your book? Because I love how your book actually ties into my book, because you actually talk about how we can improve our communication style by using our intuition or our higher self.
Yeah, well, I think what it gets down to with the book is the deepest desire that we have. And this is why we have so many, different models of or modes of communication, and we have texting and we used to have fax, but anyway, we have all these different ways, but and we can falter so many times, but we never quit. There's this deep desire to really connect, right? To really connect, and I think like connect on a higher level as well. You were talking about a child. When we were talking about the book that you worked with, there was a child that missed God. Because I think it was a female. She remembered time before she was born, like when she was really connected. So I think the deepest part of this book that makes it, believe it or not, a spiritual book, is that I finally get to that bottom line that people want to connect. They want to feel aligned with their brother and sister. And even in the miscommunication, all these strategies that we have where they falter, we're actually doing our best to connect. Like even people fighting on Facebook and they're arguing, deep down, they're trying to connect. It might fall down and it might like get ugly and they're calling each other's names. Even when someone calls you a name, if you follow the thread down inside of themselves or inside of yourself, you call someone a name, you're absolutely trying to express something and have them get something. Of course, the strategy fails so many times. And that's the thing that I point out in the book. Oh, look, here's one of the strategies. Whoever's loudest is the most right. That's such a logical thought, and it's a strategy I'll take. So let me start screaming. Well, it doesn't work. But if you follow the thread down, you'll see that this person is just trying to be loud enough so that maybe the person will hear them. And why do they want to be heard? Because they want to be aligned with, they want to connect with, they want to feel one with their brother and sister deep down. So yeah, there's all these different strategies I list off. Yeah, but the bottom line is wanting to connect, wanting to be one with their brother and sister.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. I love that. So I'm going to ask you to disclose maybe. I was hoping you could share, because I know what they are, but I would love for you to share. What is your favorite model?
Okay, yeah, thank you for asking that. There are different models of communication. Sorry, did I?
Miscommunication.
Yes. That was the hardest thing about writing this book. I had to flip everything. So there's models of communication, which I've learned. I don't know if you've ever heard of nonviolent communication and compassionate communication. That's the same model where you, so I kind of flipped it on its ear, you know. The actual model of communication talks about, you know, putting out a clear request, without it being a demand. Because if you ask something of someone and they say no, and then you get mad, that wasn't a real request. That was like you were secretly demanding that they do it. And then when they say no, you're like, how dare you? Rather than, can you? They say no, and then you accept it. Okay, so there's different models of communication. Did I say communicate? There's different models of communication. I created the models of miscommunication. And my favorite, as I'm looking at them here, I'm going to go with the bubble model. There's a bubble model of miscommunication. And that is where you are in your own bubble. And then another person who you're supposed to be communicating with is in another bubble. And these bubbles just kind of exist on their own. It's kind of like if you could picture, you know, they have those cartoons where a little thought form is coming out on the side, you know, in a little bubble. And the other person has a bubble. Okay, it never crosses over. So I'll give you an example with my own history. And maybe you've had this experience. You're talking to someone, you're expressing something really important to you. This is from your bubble. Okay, you're expressing, I had this experience, this is interesting to me. I have a lot of emotion around this. This was a deep experience. And then after you're done, the person in their own bubble just comes up with something else about them. Oh my gosh, it's so discouraging. Like all you want to hear is something that reflects back that they got it, that they heard you. But if they're in their own bubble, all they're doing is waiting for you to say a certain word that'll trigger them about their life. You know, you can be going on and on. Oh, you know, I was driving in my car and I ran over this pothole and, you know, my tire blew up, you know, my poor Ford. And the guy goes, Ford? Oh, you know, I had a Ford when I was like, you know, in my 20s. Like, disconnection, miscommunication, two bubbles. That's the bubble model. In the book, I go through, I don't know, just about 20 different models of miscommunication. But that's the one that comes to my mind because it's probably the most painful.
Yeah, it makes me wonder how many times we have been in those models without even realizing it. I always like to say we're the hero in our own story. And so when there's miscommunication, I wonder how many times we blame it on the other person and take no accountability for ourselves.
Exactly. And can I mention another model that just comes
Yes,
to mind?
please.
It's called the rear view mirror model. And so someone's driving they're driving, right? And then there's a rear view mirror. If you look in the mirror as you're driving forward, it's kind of dangerous. You know, you're supposed to be looking. I mean, you might need to look back there for a moment just to see what was back there. But you got to keep your eyes straight forward, right? So as people communicate using the rear view mirror model, they are not living in the moment. They're not living in the present. Mm-hmm. They are reacting to you, something that you just said, but they're not responding clearly to what you just said. They are reacting to their past. They're looking in the rearview mirror and they're thinking of something that happened in their past. I have a story. I was on a vacation with a friend of mine. We were going to go on a canoe ride, and we're getting on the canoe, and I said something like, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's get in the canoe." So what does that mean? let's get in the canoe. Let us, me and you, go into a canoe. If you just communicate, that's just clear communication. However, in the model of rear view mirror, what she heard was, you have to do all the paddling. Because of in her past experience where she was on a date or something with a boyfriend, she went on a canoe ride and he made her do all the canoeing. So instead of her hearing me just say, hey, let's get in, she heard, you have to do all the paddling. Miscommunication because of the model called the rear view mirror model. So there you go.
Yeah, that I can see being pretty common.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that fascinated me, so this is a little bit of a personal question because I want advice from the author because this wouldn't have been in your book, but I've been a Toastmaster for almost 15 years. And I would love to know if there's any specific lesson that you can impart from your book that I could use to improve my public speeches, because you know, I would stand up and do, you know, a 5 to 7 minute speech in the club, or I do presentations as part of what I do for a living as a marketer. So I'm not just an author, I'm also a marketer. And so communication is of utmost importance as I do these presentations. So a presentation versus a conversation. And I'm just wondering if there's any specific tips that you could impart that would be more apt for a presentation versus a conversation.
Interesting. That's an interesting question. I would say it might be the same for a conversation and a presentation. But in the beginning, I think it's always the same. To communicate anything, if you don't have a connection, then it doesn't transfer. It's kind of like a computer system, I guess. If you're not plugged in or you're not connected to the internet, you're not going to be able to download information if you don't have the connection. You know, our Cox communication cable went down. We're doing a live yoga. My wife is doing a live yoga class. So she's teaching. All of a sudden the connection goes down from the cable. So nothing's getting across. So until you establish some connection, something that they are aligned with you on, the transfer of information is not going to happen. There's always going to be some mode, you know, some mode that gets the information across. And if your connection could be attuned to their purpose in some way, I imagine if you're doing a presentation to an audience, you're attuned to what their purpose is. And if you can align your higher purpose with what their higher purpose is, not only are you connected, you know, on the same path, but it's aligned on something that's going upward mobility. A lot of people are connecting on Facebook in different places in a negative, and it's just a drag. Like, oh, we're aligning on hating somebody, or we're aligning on putting something down. Yay, it's a drag. Ultimately, I think it's a drag. But if you start a presentation where you align with their higher purpose, they'll be like, their soul will actually be like excited. Oh boy, not only are we connected to the speaker, but she's going to lead us somewhere that we really ultimately want to go on a very big level. So I think that's what comes to mind.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Like I said, as a Toastmaster, we are always looking to improve our speeches. So anything that I can garner is great. So yes, that is actually one of the things that I will focus on more in the future, is making sure that I immediately establish a connection with my audience. And I think that has to begin with the opening. So that's a perfect tip. So thank you very much for that.
We have more to go, so please return. Huh? The Joys, Sorrows, and Comic Relief of Miscommunication is a satirical view on the silly thing we call communication. This is a lighthearted yet biting look at the mishaps, misfires, and blunders we experience as we attempt to send and receive messages in the modern age. Huh? The Joys, Sorrows, and Comic Relief of Miscommunications by James Anthony Ellis. Get it at Amazon today. So first question, what publishing company did you use? Were you satisfied enough to suggest them to someone who's looking to publish?
I self-published, and the reason I did that was because my first books all had a lot of internet content and linking and descriptions of technology. And if I had gone via a traditional publisher, from when I finished the book to publishing would have been 2 years. And literally, as you know, with the internet and technology, the minute I published, it was already out of date. So 2 years would have been way too long. And so I find it faster, and I have complete control over the process. Mind you, I'm also publishing nonfiction books, which I think makes a difference. Had I had fiction books, I may have gone a different route for that. So I think I don't want to discourage anybody from getting a publisher. I think it depends on your genre and what, who your audience is.
Okay. All right, Jim. Same question, Jim.
Can you ask it again?
Did you use a publisher, and were you satisfied with their services?
Yeah, so I self-published this book as well as my 7 other books using Amazon at the time. It was CreateSpace. I think it was called CreateSpace at the time. They've moved on to another name. So I self-published. I was very happy with that because I can do some design, and it's so much. You get so much more of a royalty self-publishing. The percentages are 60% and above, where if I went through a publisher, I know they'd be less. And I believe I would be doing the same amount of marketing maybe 3 months later. It'd still be up to me to market and promote and get my word out there and the book out there. So I decided to do self-publishing. I'm happy with it. I just need to do much more work on getting the word out.
Okay. And the last question, if you could take a plane ride anywhere with any author, dead or alive, who would it be and why? And where would you go?
Oh, I know the answer to this one right away, because my favorite all-time author is Sue Grafton. I got hooked on her Alphabet Murders back in 1991, and I made the mistake of starting with the 3rd book in the series, not realizing I should be reading them in order. And so I've ended up collecting them all as much as I could in hardcover. And I have a Christmas card signed by her from a long time ago. And she was writing her final book in the series, which was Z, and she passed away. And her family's not publishing her work. So they've announced that the alphabet ends at Y. And I was reading Y, the letter Y, when she passed. And so I took forever to read it because I felt like the main character had also died, which made me sad. And so I would love to get on a plane with Sue Grafton and talk to her about her final book. And I think, well, let's go somewhere exciting. Why not go to Australia? I lived there when I was 25 for a year. So I think I would go back to Sydney. And also, I'd be on the plane with her for a very long time, so I'd get to ask her a lot of questions.
Okay, Jim, same question.
All right, well, it's very clear for me. It would be Alexander Dumas, who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, because the guy had such great plans for revenge. I mean, this book, the character in this book took such detailed account on how to get revenge, because he wasn't about atonement or forgiveness. No, he went direct for the big plan, how to get revenge on somebody. I sound like an evil person, but no, I'm just a Scorpio who really enjoys the idea that you would really hold accountable people and maybe, let them fall a little bit just because of their own hubris. That's not a word he would use. But anyway, I'm having fun with this answer. So Alexander Dumas, and I think we would go to like 1844. We go back in time somehow on this plane to the Mediterranean, where a lot of his stories, the islands of the Mediterranean, where a lot of that story took place.
That's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Writer to Writer Interviews. I'd like to thank my guests, Carolyn Wilman and James Anthony Ellis, for joining me today on Writer to Writer episodes. Thank you, the audience, for watching. Have yourself a great day. Don't forget to subscribe. Are you a guest looking for a host to interview you? Or are you a host looking for guests to interview? Radio Guest List is the website for you. It's a free listing of guests looking for shows to interview them, as well as a free listing of shows looking for guests. Whether you're looking for a guest to interview or shows to interview you, go to radioguestlist.com.